Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Have you ever wondered why Jesus would have sent the disciples out onto the lake in the first place? I mean, this is Jesus we're talking about. He most likely would have known that a storm was on its way. So why not just tell the disciples to spend the night on the shore with him? If he wanted to be alone, he certainly could have walked away from them. He could have gone up into the hills to have some space, but he chose not to. So it's not the disciples' choice. It's Jesus' command for them to return to the other shore, to get in the boat and head out across the lake. And notice that Jesus didn't send a storm, just as Jesus doesn't send the storms of life our way today. But I think Jesus knew what was coming. So why not spare the disciples all that fear, turmoil, and danger? Well, one reason could be that sometimes there are great revelations that come out of our storms. My own experience is that it's been through some of the toughest and darkest periods of my life, through periods of real struggle, that I've really grown, where I've learned most about God and about myself. Now, a good number of those disciples were seasoned fishermen. They knew the sea. They'd seen storms and survived storms, and would no doubt live through storms in the future too. But for all their experience, for all their nautical knowledge, they hadn't yet experienced Jesus' rescue of them firsthand. Maybe it was only through being scared, almost at their wits' end, and then to experience the rescue by Jesus, that they would then have that experience to carry them through all the storms that would come up in the future. And in fact, of course, it was only Peter who experienced that close and personal life-saving encounter with Jesus. And he experienced it because only he wanted more than just to sit in the boat. Peter met the storm head-on. He fought the waves and the wind, and he felt the awesome experience of touching the very hand of God. He then was the only one willing to get out of the boat and head across the waves to Jesus' side. It was only Peter who wasn't content to stay where he was in his comfortable seat. Peter wanted more, and Peter somehow found that courage to step out of the boat. So I guess the real miracle here is not that Jesus walked on top of the water. Perhaps it's more that Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water, and experienced Christ reaching down and pulling him up with just that strength of a few fingers. For Peter, it was the revelation of having Christ reach down and touch him personally in his need. In the words of the author John Ortberg, if he wanted to walk on water, he had to get out of the boat. As followers of Jesus today, He looks on us, and of course he's pleased that we want to know him and to worship him and to serve him. But until we find the courage to step out of our seats, to want to enlarge our faith, to have such a passionate desire to actually touch Jesus and those that he sends us to, so we are willing to do more than sit in our pews, we will continue to have that comfortable or safe faith. No risks, no growing closer to God, no touching others because we're burning inside with the excitement of Christ. I mean, do you really want to be waving at Jesus from a comfortable distance? I certainly don't. As a church, as individuals, as people of faith, as part of the Jesus movement in the world, in order to really live out a personal relationship with him, in order to be people of hope in the world, we need to learn to have the courage to get out of the comfortable boat and try walking among the waves of life and the world around us. In Mark's Gospel, his account tells us that Jesus intended to pass them by on the water, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. Why did Jesus want to pass them by? Was he trying to race them and get across to the other side first? Did he want to impress them with a really cool trick? The verb parerkomai, to pass by, is used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and it's a technical term to refer to a theophany. Now, a theophany is God revealing himself to someone or to a group of people for a particular purpose. For example, in the Old Testament, we read of God putting Moses in a cleft of a rock so Moses could see while my glory passes by, and then the Lord passes before him. God told Elijah to stand on the mountain, for the Lord is about to pass by. There's a pattern in these stories. In each case, God had to get people's attention through a burning bush, or wind and fire, or by walking on the water. With each person, God was going to call them to do something extraordinary. In each situation, the person felt afraid. I mean, after all, they were encountering the creator of the universe. But every time that people said yes to their calling, they experienced the power of God in a new way in their lives. Are you sitting comfortably in your comfort zone, trying to stay safe? Are you fearful of what might happen if you take a few steps forward? Let me tell you, I believe God is inviting us all to take a step forward, to go deeper with him. He's inviting us today to enlarge our faith and our vision. He's calling us to join him in his life-changing and hope-bringing work in the world. So let me ask you a question. What is your boat? What is it that's stopping you from taking that next step of faith? Our boat is whatever represents safety and security to us, apart from God himself. Our boat is whatever we're tempted to put our trust in, especially when life gets tough. So then your boat is whatever keeps you so comfortable that you don't want to give it up, even if it's keeping you from joining Jesus out there on the waves. Your boat is whatever pulls you away from the high adventure of full discipleship, from a life of joining Jesus in his life and world-changing movement. Your fear will tell you what your boat is. Just ask yourself this. What is it that produces most fear in you? Especially when you think of leaving it behind and stepping out in faith. Is it a fear of judgment from others or of making a mistake? Is it fear of being seen as a fool or a fanatic? Is it fear of making a commitment? Fear of loss or dignity? Perhaps it's a fear of failure. Before Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for polio that finally worked, he tried 200 unsuccessful times. When Thomas Edison was branded a failure in his attempts to create a light bulb, he said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Before James Dyson invented his vacuum cleaner, he went through 5,127 prototypes. So did Peter fail? Well, in one sense, yes. He took his eyes off the Lord and he sank. But I think there were even 11 greater failures sitting in the boat. At least Peter got out and he walked on the water. He walked toward Jesus. And even for a short time, he did walk on the water. Here's what the writer John Ortberg says. Only Peter knew the glory of walking on the water. He alone knew what it was to attempt to do what he was not capable of doing on his own. The feeling of euphoria, being empowered by God to actually do it. So you see, failure really does not shape us. The way we respond to failure is what shapes us. Let me say that again. Failure does not shape us. The way we respond to failure shapes us. We know, don't we, that the line between thou shalt not be afraid and thou shalt not be ridiculous is often a very fine one. Knowing when to get out of the boat and take a risk needs courage. But it also needs the wisdom to ask the right questions. It needs the discernment to recognize the voice of Jesus and the patience to wait for his call. So this is all about recognizing that we are followers of Jesus 7 days per week and in the whole of life, serving God on our front lines, wherever they may be. Here's John Ortberg one more time. As a crucial part of your calling, you are given certain talents and gifts, longings and desires. To identify these with clarity, to develop them with skill, and to use them joyfully and humbly to serve God and his creation is central to why you were created. A few weeks ago, some of you heard me speak about holy discontent, something we can all find deep inside ourselves if we're prepared to look. Holy discontent is something God has placed in our hearts, a difference he wants us to make in the world, and a feeling that stays with us. A calling is something we discover. It's not something we necessarily choose. The word vocation comes from the Latin word for voice, and discovering it involves very careful listening. And then we need to take the courageous step out into that calling. And God has something for each and every one of us. It may be big or it may be small, but it will be significant. And it will be something for us to be or to do at this specific point in our lives. Here's the thing. You and I were made for something more than merely avoiding failure. There's something inside us that wants to walk on the water, to leave the comfort of mere existence and to abandon ourselves to the higher adventure of following Jesus. So let me ask you once again, what is your boat? In what areas of your life are you shrinking back from fully and courageously trusting God? Fear will tell you what your boat is, and leaving it may be the hardest thing that you will ever do. So pray. Talk to a trusted friend. Talk to your church leader. God has things in mind for us which perhaps we haven't even imagined yet. But remember this, if you want to walk on the water, you've got to get out of the boat.